My brother stood up at our father's funeral, pointed at my 8-year-old son in the front pew, and told a room full of mourners that the boy was actually his, and he was taking him home that night. For a second, nobody breathed. Then the whispering started. I pulled Danny closer while my brother Wesley stood there in his black suit, jaw tight, staring at my son like he was reclaiming lost property. Wesley and my late wife had dated briefly in college, years before she and I ever met. He'd apparently spent the last month convincing himself that the math lined up and that Danny's crooked smile was his crooked smile. Our father's casket was still at the front of the church. He picked that moment. The next morning, it was pounding on my door at 7. Wesley shoved an old photo of himself at 8 years old into my hands and said, "Tell me that's not the same face." It did look like Danny. Kids in a family look alike. That's how it works. I told him to get help and shut the door. He stood on my porch shouting for half an hour until a neighbor threatened to call someone. That Sunday, he called a family meeting, which meant a group text ordering everyone to my mother's house for an emergency. 19 relatives packed into her living room while Wesley paced with a folder. Actual documents, printed ancestry charts, a timeline, photos of himself lined up next to photos of Danny. He talked for 40 minutes about how my wife must have known, how she stayed quiet, how he'd been robbed of his son. My cousin, who's a nurse, finally said gently that resemblance between an uncle and nephew is the most normal thing on earth. Wesley screamed that he wanted a DNA test or he'd go to court. My mother told him he needed treatment. He stormed out. 3 weeks of silence. Then Danny's school called. Someone was there to pick him up who wasn't on the list. I drove like a lunatic. Wesley was in the front office with paperwork he'd forged with my signature, calmly telling the secretary I'd agreed to hand over guardianship. The principal had already called the police. When he saw me, he didn't even deny it. 2 officers walked him out while he insisted the boy belonged with him. The school banned him from the property. Then came the CPS calls. Every couple of weeks, a caseworker at my door. Neglect, unsafe home, substances, all of it anonymous, all of it Wesley. They never found anything. Eventually, the same worker would show up half apologizing before she even knocked. My mother begged me to bring Danny to Thanksgiving, swore Wesley was in therapy and doing better. The second we walked in, his own kids ran up to Danny chanting that he was their real brother and my house was fake. I picked up my son and left. Wesley followed us to the car, screaming that I was stealing his child while my son cried in the back seat, asking why his uncle hated us. I got a restraining order. He broke it the same afternoon, showing up at Danny's karate class and trying to sign him out. The instructor sensed something off and locked the door until police came. They gave Wesley a warning. He was back 2 days later at the pharmacy, trailing us down the aisles, crouching to whisper to Danny that his mommy in heaven wanted them together. Security removed him. The last time was a Saturday at the community pool. I looked away for 10 seconds to grab a towel, and when I turned back, Wesley was kneeling in front of my son, gripping his wrist, telling him to come to the car quietly. I shouted. He scooped Danny up and ran for the lot. Other parents started moving. He got Danny into a car seat, and I reached the door as he threw it in reverse, and he was gone. I called 911 from my knees in the parking lot, barely able to speak. They caught him at the regional airport. He'd bought 2 tickets to a state with weaker custody laws, planning to fight it from there, using his own kid's old passport, and hoping he could bluff Danny through. Security had already been flagged. They surrounded him at the gate while he clutched my son and sobbed the same 3 words over and over. "He's mine, he's mine, he's mine." It took 2 officers to open his arms. The court ordered a psychiatric hold and long-term treatment, and full no contact. Danny sleeps fine again now. What would you have done if the person stalking your child was your own blood?